On the evening of 25 March 2006, as the sun began to set over Johannesburg, O.R Tambo International Airport, the country's busiest and most vital transport hub, a meticulously planned robbery was about to occur. This was not just another smash and grab, but a masterclass in criminal precision, audacity, and insider collusion. The target was a colossal consignment of foreign currency, flown in from London aboard a South African Airways flight. The amount stolen would be staggering, initially estimated at 74 million rand, but later widely reported to be closer to 100 million, making it the largest cash heist the nation had ever witnessed. The heist became infamous not just for the sheer scale of the loot, but for the breathtaking simplicity and effectiveness of its execution. A heavily armed gang numbering around 24 men managed to breach the airport's high-security airside perimeter seemingly with ease. They drove vehicles disguised to look like official airport transport, complete with flashing lights, blending into the controlled chaos of the tarmac. The criminals knew exactly where the plane would be, what it was carrying, and precisely when to strike. This level of detail pointed to a single, unnerving conclusion. This was an inside job, orchestrated with help from the very people entrusted with the airport's security and operations. How could a gang of armed robbers penetrate what was supposed to be a fortress? How did they know the exact location of a high-value cargo shipment? The robbery was carried out with chilling professionalism without a single shot being fired, a testament to the robbers' confidence and planning. The story of the great O.R Tambo heist is more than just a tale of a robbery. It is a complex narrative of betrayal, corruption, and a prolonged, often frustrating quest for justice. It revealed deep-seated connections between organized crime and corrupt officials within both private companies and state institutions, including the police service itself. The investigation that followed would be a long and winding road, filled with dramatic arrests, shocking revelations, and a trial that stretched on for years. For a crime of such magnitude and precision to succeed, the architects needed more than just brute force. They needed knowledge. The mastermind behind the operation was identified as Christopher Billings, a man with the connections and vision to bring together a diverse team of criminals and insiders. Billings understood that the airport's defenses were not physical walls or fences, but the people who guarded them. He allegedly began recruiting key airport personnel months in advance, patiently piecing together his plan. His primary targets were employees of the airport's company South Africa, the very entity responsible for ensuring the airport's secure operation. These insiders would be the key to unlocking the treasure chest. Among the crucial insiders was Sean Subramoni, a control officer who had access to the airport's restricted areas. His role was allegedly to provide the gang with the necessary access cards, allowing their vehicles to pass through security checkpoints without raising suspicion. Another pivotal figure was Nazir Ismail, an airport employee who would later become a state witness. Ismail claimed that Billings had approached him with the idea, laying out the blueprint for the heist. His cooperation, however self-serving, would later provide investigators with a glimpse into the intricate planning that preceded the robbery. These men weren't just low-level staff, they held positions of trust that gave them access to sensitive information. The most critical piece of the puzzle, however, was allegedly provided by Magdalene Musa, an operations controller at Airports Company South Africa. Her job gave her influence over the allocation of parking bays for incoming aircraft. On the night of the heist, South African Airways flight SAA 273 from London was scheduled to dock at a specific bay. Musa was accused of redirecting the aircraft to a more remote and secluded bay, far from the prying eyes of most security cameras. This single action was instrumental, creating a blind spot where the robbers could operate with minimal risk of being recorded or seen. Musa would later deny this, claiming the bay allocation was random, but her involvement was central to the prosecution's case. The criminal contingent of the gang was a formidable assembly of at least 24 men armed with high-caliber weapons, including AK-47 assault rifles. They were a mix of seasoned criminals and hired muscle, brought together for their specific skills and willingness to engage in high-risk, high-reward ventures. Dressed in uniforms to mimic airport security personnel, they were prepared for a violent confrontation, though their plan was designed to avoid it. The seamless coordination between the hardened criminals on the outside and the compromised employees on the inside created a perfect storm, turning O.R Tambo International Airport into their personal playground for one fateful evening. As Flight SAA-273 touched down and taxied towards its designated parking bay on that Saturday evening, everything appeared normal. Deep within the plane's hold were bags filled with a fortune in foreign currency, dollars, pounds, and euros, destined for South African banks. As the aircraft came to a halt in the secluded bay allegedly chosen by Magdalene Musa, the ground crew began their routine procedures. It was at this precise moment that the robbers made their move, emerging from the shadows of the tarmac like ghosts. The gang's vehicles, two white backies modified to look like official airport vehicles, drove directly onto the airside and approached the stationary aircraft. The robbers, disguised in security uniforms, moved with an unnerving calmness and authority. They swiftly surrounded the plane and confronted the handful of security guards and police officers on duty. Armed with AK-47s, their presence was intimidating enough to ensure immediate compliance. They held the guards at gunpoint, ordering them to lie on the ground. The operation was swift and silent. There was no shouting, no panic, and crucially, no gunfire. The professionalism on display was terrifying. With the security personnel neutralized, the robbers focused on their prize. They knew exactly which containers held the cash. They boarded the aircraft's cargo hold, and within minutes began offloading the bags of money. The entire operation was a model of efficiency, lasting no more than 20 minutes from start to finish. They ignored all other cargo, focusing solely on the currency they had come for. The precision of their actions confirmed that their inside information was flawless. They had a detailed manifest of the plane's cargo, and they executed their plan without a single misstep, transforming a high-security international airport into the scene of a perfectly choreographed crime. Once the bags of cash weighing hundreds of kilograms were loaded onto their vehicles, the gang prepared for their exit. They had breached the airport security, held up guards, and plundered a fortune, all under the noses of the airport authorities. As they drove away from the aircraft, they calmly passed through the same security gates they had entered, their fake credentials once again serving their purpose. By the time the alarm was officially raised, the robbers and their 100 million rand prize had melted away into the sprawling metropolis of Johannesburg, leaving behind a scene of disbelief and a security apparatus in absolute tatters. With the loot secured, the gang's convoy of disguised vehicles exited the airport's restricted zone and merged with the evening traffic, disappearing into the vast network of highways surrounding Johannesburg. They split up, heading to various safe houses scattered across Johannesburg. At these locations, the monumental task of dividing the spoils began, a process fraught with its own dangers of greed and betrayal. The money, a mix of US dollars, British pounds, and euros, had to be counted and distributed among the numerous participants. This included not only the armed robbers who executed the raid, but also the crucial insiders and the mastermind who had orchestrated the entire affair. The sheer volume of cash made this a complex logistical challenge. The gang had to work quickly, knowing that every passing moment increased the risk of discovery. The initial unity that had made the heist a success would soon be tested as each member walked away with their share of a life-changing sum of money, carrying with them a secret that could land them in prison for decades. News of the robbery spread like wildfire, first through law enforcement channels and then to the media. The initial reports were confusing, but the scale of the crime quickly became apparent. The police were left scrambling, trying to piece together what had happened from the shocked and bewildered airport staff who had been held at gunpoint. The robbers had left behind very little forensic evidence. They had worn gloves, and their disguises had obscured their identities. The primary challenge for investigators was figuring out how the perimeter was breached, a question that led them directly to the suspicion of an inside job, the only plausible explanation for such a seamless operation. In the days that followed, a sense of impunity seemed to hang over the perpetrators. They had pulled off the biggest cash robbery in the country's history, and had seemingly vanished without a trace. The robbers were now in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse with the authorities, armed with a fortune that was both a blessing and a curse. In the aftermath of the heist, the South African Police Service launched one of the largest and most high-profile investigations in its history. A special task team was assembled, comprising top detectives dedicated to cracking the case. The pressure was immense, not only from the public and the media, but also from international law enforcement agencies concerned about the security of global air travel. The investigation's first breakthrough came not from a lucky break, but from painstaking intelligence work. Informants within the criminal underworld began to whisper names, and detectives started connecting the dots between known armed robbers and the audacious airport crime. Within weeks, the task team began to close in on the suspects. The first wave of arrests took place in May 2006, as police swooped in on various locations across Gauteng. These raids were dramatic and sometimes violent. One suspect was shot and killed during a confrontation with police. The arrests yielded the first tangible success of the investigation, the recovery of a portion of the stolen money. Around 6 million rand in foreign currency was found in the possession of the arrested men. Crucially, the serial numbers on these notes matched those of the stolen consignment, providing the first solid evidence linking the suspects directly to the crime. As more suspects were rounded up, the intricate web of conspiracy began to unravel. By July 2006, 17 people were in custody, including the alleged mastermind, Christopher Billings, and several of the airport employees who had allegedly facilitated the heist. The arrests sent a clear message that the police were making progress, but the investigation was far from over. The suspects were a tight-lipped group, and detectives had to rely on building a case brick by brick, using circumstantial evidence, informant testimony, and the recovered cash to tie each individual to the crime. The case was complex, involving a large number of accused with varying levels of involvement. The investigation also exposed the fragile loyalties within the criminal syndicate. Faced with the prospect of long prison sentences, some of those involved began to consider cooperating with the state. The insiders in particular were vulnerable. Airport employees Nazir Ismail, Sean Subramoni, and Magdalene Musa eventually agreed to turn state witness in exchange for leniency. Their testimony would be crucial for the prosecution, offering a direct look inside the conspiracy. However, their credibility would later be questioned in court, with a judge describing some of them as dishonest witnesses looking to save their own skin, adding another layer of complexity to the pursuit of justice. Just as the investigation seemed to be gaining momentum, a bizarre and deeply embarrassing event occurred that threatened to derail the entire case. On the 25th of May, 2006, exactly 2 months after the airport heist, a significant portion of the recovered money and other exhibits related to the case were stolen. The theft did not happen from a warehouse or a transit vehicle. It happened from a high-security safe at the SAP's Serious and Violent Crime Unit offices in Benoni. This was the very unit entrusted with safeguarding the evidence that was supposed to convict the heist suspects. The thieves made off with an estimated 40 million rand in evidence, which included the initially recovered 6 million rand and other assets seized from the suspects. This secondary heist was a devastating blow to the morale of the investigators and a source of national outrage. It suggested that the corruption enabling the original crime ran even deeper than first imagined, potentially extending into the ranks of the police service itself. The thieves had seemingly bypassed sophisticated security systems at the police station with ease, mirroring the professionalism of the airport robbers. The incident raised immediate suspicions that police officers were involved, suggesting that the rot was systemic. The subsequent investigation into the police safe theft quickly confirmed the worst fears. 5 individuals were arrested in connection with the crime, and among them were 3 police officers. This revelation was a scandal of immense proportions. It demonstrated that the criminal syndicates had not only infiltrated the airport authority, but had also managed to compromise members of the elite police units investigating them. The incident cast a dark shadow over the entire O.R Tambo heist case. While the loss of physical evidence was a setback, the prosecution still had a strong case built on witness testimony and other evidence. However, the event severely damaged the credibility of the police. Defense lawyers for the heist suspects would later use the incident to argue that their clients were being framed by a corrupt and incompetent police force. The episode became a notorious subplot in the larger drama of the heist, a stark reminder of the pervasive challenges of corruption that plagued South Africa's law enforcement agencies. The trial of the O.R Tambo heist suspects began in the Johannesburg High Court, marking the start of one of the longest and most convoluted legal battles in recent South African history. The case was immense in its scope, involving a large number of accused, a mountain of evidence, and a complex web of allegations. The legal proceedings were plagued by delays from the very beginning. With over 50 postponements, the trial dragged on for 6 grueling years, testing the patience of the justice system, the witnesses, and the public. These delays were caused by a variety of factors, including changes in legal representation, interlocutory applications, and the sheer complexity of managing a trial with so many defendants. The prosecution, led by a determined team of state advocates, meticulously presented its case. They called a long list of witnesses, including the airport security guards who were held up, banking officials who could verify the stolen currency, and most importantly, the insider accomplices who had turned state's evidence. The testimony of Nazir Ismail, Sean Subramoni, and Magdalene Musa was central to the state's case. They provided a narrative from within the conspiracy, detailing how the heist was planned and how their specific actions had enabled the robbers to succeed. However, the state's star witnesses were not without their flaws. Under intense cross-examination from a battery of skilled defense lawyers, their credibility was relentlessly attacked. The defense portrayed them as unreliable, dishonest individuals who were willing to say anything to avoid a long prison sentence. The judge presiding over the case would later echo some of these concerns, describing Ismail and Subramoni in his final judgment as dishonest witnesses. This created a significant challenge for the prosecution, which had to corroborate their testimony with other more objective evidence to secure convictions against the main accused. Over the long years of the trial, the cast of characters in the dock began to shrink. By the time the verdict was due in 2012, 3 of the implicated men had died from various causes, escaping earthly justice. Of the original group arrested, only 9 accused remained to hear their fate. Some of the accused had committed further serious crimes while out on bail, including murder and other armed robberies. This highlighted another systemic problem, a bail system that allowed dangerous, repeat offenders back onto the streets. The trial was not just about the 2006 heist, it became a reflection of the broader struggles within South Africa's criminal justice system. On the 11th of July, 2012, nearly 6 years and 4 months after the audacious robbery, Judge Nico Coetzee delivered his long-awaited verdict in the Johannesburg High Court. Christopher Billings, the alleged mastermind, was conspicuously absent, having failed to appear for the judgment. His absence prompted an immediate warrant for his arrest, and he was apprehended later that same day, his attempt to evade justice ultimately failing. The judge methodically worked through the evidence against each of the accused, delivering a mixed but decisive outcome. 6 of the accused were found guilty for their roles in the crime. Ananias Nepfumembe and Thokozani Zikubu were convicted of the most serious charge robbery with aggravating circumstances. Zikubu was already serving a 20-year sentence for a murder he had committed while on bail for the heist. 4 other men, Fox Sithole, Eddie Ubisi, Ronnie Mbuisa, and Uakararaja Mandu, were found guilty of lesser but still serious charges, including attempted robbery and being an accessory after the fact. Sithole and Ubisi, like Zikubu, were already serving life sentences for other violent robberies committed while on bail, underscoring their status as career criminals. The judgment provided a degree of closure, but it was far from a total victory for the state. One of the accused, Cecil Aronzi, was acquitted of all charges, with the judge finding insufficient evidence to link him to the crime. Furthermore, the sentences handed down to the state witnesses were seen by some as controversially lenient. Nazir Ismail, who admitted to his deep involvement in planning the heist, received a wholly suspended 20-year sentence in exchange for his testimony. This outcome highlighted the difficult compromises prosecutors must often make, trading leniency for crucial insider testimony in complex conspiracy cases. Despite the convictions, the vast majority of the 100 million rand was never recovered. The money had long since been laundered, spent or hidden, disappearing into the vast underground economy. The verdict marked the end of a long legal chapter, but left many questions unanswered. The great O.R Tambo heist served as a brutal and public wake-up call, exposing critical vulnerabilities at the heart of the country's national security infrastructure. The ease with which the gang infiltrated a national key point highlighted systemic failures in security protocols, vetting procedures for employees, and surveillance systems. The airport's company South Africa was forced to undertake a massive and costly overhaul of its security, implementing stricter access controls, enhanced surveillance technology, and more rigorous background checks for all staff with access to restricted areas. because it demonstrated how organized crime syndicates had become adept at recruiting accomplices within trusted institutions, turning employees into assets. This was not a problem unique to the airport. The subsequent theft of evidence from a police safe proved that corruption was a cancer that had metastasized within law enforcement as well. It is important to note that the 2006 heist was not an isolated incident. O.R Tambo Airport had a history of being a target for high-value robberies. In 2001 alone, there were two major heists, one involving the theft of $6.5 million from a Swiss airplane, and another where nearly $10 million was stolen from a KLM aircraft. These earlier crimes should have served as a warning, yet the lessons were clearly not learned effectively enough to prevent the even more audacious robbery in 2006. Ultimately, the legacy of the O.R Tambo heist is a complex one. While many of the stolen millions were never found, the crime left an indelible mark on the South African psyche. It remains a cautionary tale of how easily the systems we rely on for safety can be compromised from within, and a benchmark against which the country's progress in fighting organized crime is still measured. Let us know your thoughts about this heist in the comments. That's all for this episode. Be safe, stay blessed, and don't forget to like and subscribe.